Paul the Apostle wrote in Romans chapter 1, verse 16, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes." There is indeed a power to the gospel of Jesus Christ. It's a power so great that Paul later on talks about people who share the gospel and want to get financial gain for it. And that even though that's not right for them to do, it doesn't diminish from the message itself. Now later on, the Scriptures tell us that the Word of God is actually active and powerful and sharper than any two-edged sword, able to pierce the division between soul and spirit, able to give us the motivations of our heart. And that's part of it. God said that my word will never return to me void, but will accomplish exactly the purpose for which I have sent it. So the gospel has a power. The gospel is going to do something. But it's not one of those things that it gets sent out and everything changes. Everything automatically responds positively to the message of the gospel of Jesus Christ. No, in fact, quite the contrary. And in Matthew chapter 13, where we're beginning today, Jesus is teaching parables about the effect of the gospel on earth. Because it's not always positive. In fact, in many cases, it's extremely negative. But it's still a power to be reckoned with. And so we're going to see a whole series of parables in the next couple of chapters. And they're really called the parables of the kingdom. Because Jesus tells in story form the effect of the power of the gospel on earth. Now this morning we're only going to go through verse 23. We're going to look at the first one of these parables, the parable of the sower. Now, for those of you who know me and my lack of a green thumb, actually I like to say that I have a black thumb, and it's not because I hit my thumb with a hammer. But we have a garden, and I say we in quotes, because if it weren't for my wonderful wife Margaret, there would not be a garden there. But part of my responsibility for the garden is to put it to bed during the winter. And of course, if you're going to go to bed, you need a nice blanket. And so I go out and I collect leaves in order to cover over this garden with a nice cover of leaves, keep the soil kind of warm, and then it all disintegrates into mulch, and we have this great soil for planting in the spring. Now, a year ago, last fall, I went out collecting leaves along the streets of Newburgh. And I came along to a street corner, and there were some bags of leaves on the street. And actually there were two sets on each side of the curb. And there was one of the guys who was putting out his sacks of leaves. And I said, "Hey, I need some leaves for my garden. Is it okay if I take them?" He said, "Yeah, please do. And by the way, the guy across the street, you could grab his leaves too. I know he wants to get rid of them." So I thought, wonderful. So I loaded this guy's in my pickup, and then I went across the street and I loaded the other guys and took them home. And I had just bags and bags of leaves. Took them out of the pickup and hauled them back to the garden and threw them out all over the garden. I thought it was great. Job done. Boy, that was easy. So then came springtime, and we hadn't planted any seeds. We hadn't, sown any crops to grow up in our garden, and I noticed there was a strange crop already that had come up out of the soil. Little green things about this high with a little leafy top on them. And I wondered what in the world that was, and so I went over and I tugged on one, and up came an acorn. I had gotten leaves from someone who had oak trees in their yard, and I had basically planted an oak grove in our garden. Oh boy, so I spent the entire spring and most of the summer, both Margaret and I, going around picking up oak trees that had sprouted out of these acorns, and if we hadn't have done it, we would have had a nice grove of trees in our backyard and no place to grow food. And even with that particular year, last summer, our garden didn't turn out all that well, partly because the soil was too wet and it was too acidic. We needed to do some soil amending, some soil conditioning in order to get a better yield. So I'm hoping that this year I have vowed no oak leaves. And actually my neighbor next door, I was just chatting with him over the fence, and his wife just jokingly said, "Hey, want some leaves?" And my eyes just went, "Yeah." And first I looked up at the trees. They were maple trees, so I thought, okay. And so they just, dumped all these leaves over the fence, which was great, except then the fence fell down. But that's another story. But anyway, so I thought it was kind of apt because this morning we're going to look at the parable of the sower, which is a guy going out in a field and planting a crop, and depending on how it came up, depending on what happened to the seeds, depended on what kind of condition the soil was in and what the fruit was. And it's all about the gospel. And the seed that we're going to talk about this morning is the seed of the message of the gospel of Jesus Christ. So let's begin in verse 1. Let's take a look at this. Now, where we're coming from, this is very important because we're talking about the reception for the gospel. Now, last chapter, who was Jesus speaking with? He was speaking with the Pharisees and the religious leaders. And what was their acceptance of the gospel? There wasn't any at all. In fact, not only did they not accept the message that Jesus was bringing, they said, well, anything that you do, Jesus, is by the power of Satan rather than by the power of God. And it's one of those times where, had there been metal near the Pharisees, you would not have wanted to touch it for fear that lightning would fall from the sky and destroy them. It didn't happen. But Jesus was very clear that they were on extremely dangerous ground. And so Jesus left there and he was preaching, and his own blood family came by, and they didn't ascribe what Jesus was doing to the power of Satan. They ascribed it to a crazed mind, that he had gone Looney Tunes, that they needed to bring in the guys with the white coats and take them down to the state hospital, that he had gone nuts. And Jesus used it as an opportunity to say there is actually a relationship more important than blood, at least familial blood. It is the blood of Christ, as we would find out later. But a relationship with God is the most important relationship. And so that same day, right, verse 1, Jesus went out of the house and he sat beside the sea. And great crowds gathered about him, so that he got into a boat and sat down. And the whole crowd stood on the beach. And he told them many things in parables. So you can just see the scene here, right? The house was near the Sea of Galilee. And Jesus goes out of the house, lots and lots of people milling around. He needs an open area, so he goes down to the beach. Well, it wasn't really the beach. It wasn't like sand and umbrellas and, surfing and all that kind of stuff. It's just more like the pebbles along the beach and the mud and all that. And in order to be heard more clearly, Jesus jumps in one of the fishing boats there, and he pushes a little bit out into the water. Now, at that point, the Sea of Galilee was probably pretty calm, and when you have calm water, it actually acts as a public address system, because the water reflects the sound waves back. So you could stand out in the water and speak in a normal voice, and it would be amplified so the people on the shore could hear. I actually saw that in action when I was a kid at my parents' cabin down in Northern California. Very early in the morning, I would be awoken by conversation, and I couldn't figure out where it was coming from. It sounded like it was right outside my window. I'm thinking, well, first of all, who would, I'm a kid, right? Who would get up this early? It's probably like, 9 o'clock. Who would get up that early, and why are they standing outside my window? And